Welcome back to the S.E.M podcast. We're here and we are starting year 3. Can you believe it? That's crazy to say. We're super excited. Jack and Zach are here tonight, and we're joined by our friend Ben Bright. Ben, it's so good to have you. What part of the world are you calling from tonight?
I live on the central coast of California, like in between LA and San Francisco, in a town called Morro Bay.
Oh,
So
nice.
actually
Very
got
good.
in touch with some former companions who were like, "Oh yeah, we went on our honeymoon there." I was like, "Oh, well, thanks for the call. I guess we should have gotten in touch sooner."
Oh, that's awesome. Very
Yeah.
cool. Well, joining us from Central California, we're glad to have you. Just to give you a reminder of the format, we'll talk pre-mission and your reaction of getting your call to Scotland. Then we'll jump over and talk about life since you've been home. And then we'll go back through areas, companions, and all the fun memories you have of Scotland. So I'll just turn the time to you, Ben, and you can take it away.
So pre-mission. Okay. I guess, I grew up in the church and I never took the lyrics of "I hope they call me on a mission when I grow a foot or two" very literal, but I figured that when I reached the height of 5 feet 20 inches, I better start considering it. Um, so, so I grew up in Santa Cruz, California, farther north, about 2.5 hours north of where I live now. And yeah, I grew up in the church. I still remember uh, through Young Men's, like, this lesson that we had all the time, and I was like, "This lesson again," and it was all about someone interviewing a wagon train, like a wagon driver, and who could drive the closest to the edge of the cliff. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that story, but
Yep.
I feel like that seemed like in Young Men's that was every couple weeks we had that lesson, and it worked out. It worked out well because um, it was duly noted, and took that to heart. And um, yeah, growing up in Santa Cruz, we lived like the middle of my seventh grade year. We moved up to Oregon, and we lived up there for 3.5 years. So I moved back like right at the end of my sophomore year,
Mhm.
and and like I just disclaimer, like, I'm just gonna be blunt about everything. Like, just call it how it is. And like, I hated living in Oregon. Like, I moved up there when I was 12. Like, my dad used to he used to, I'd get a call from the office when I was in elementary school, and like, "Hey, report to the office, you have a doctor's appointment," or whatever. And I'd go to the office, and my dad was there, and he's like, "Oh, signing you out," and like would write down personal, reason or whatever. And I'd walk out to the car, and like two surfboards would be in the car, and we'd go surf. Um, and so so he actually, when I was he always worked like graveyard and swing shift, and so he would work, and then when we were going to school, he would be just getting off work, so he would sit at like the drop off point and wait to say good morning and good night to us, say hi after his shift, and then he'd go home and sleep until we got home. And um, I remember he had like this old beat up Ford Courier pickup, and he had this big old mustache. And like, there was a lot of complaints at the office at the school about the man in the blue truck with the mustache. And um, um, so so it was a good way to like spend time with him doing that. I've got an older sister. Funny thing, like, so um, I got my mission call, and then I was out for 6 months. My sister got her mission call. She served in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, and then she got home 6 days before me. And I was like, "Man, you're stealing my thunder here. Like, what the heck?" So yeah, so I grew up surfing a lot, playing sports, and uh, yeah, always, kind of been active member of the church. I will say, like, growing up and going to EFY and things, and visiting, people in Utah, like there was definitely a big difference between the church in California compared to Utah. Um, I feel like lately President Nelson's been doing a good job of kind of separating the difference between doctrine and culture, because I think that the culture was a lot different. Like, I mean, I was in my age where we grew up. In my ward, I had like three people that were my age, and I think, and then a couple that were younger. I think I'm maybe one other person is active. Everyone else has either left the church or gone less active, but they should have listened to that driving the wagon close to the cliff story as good as I did, I guess. um, so yeah, so I at that time, you could turn your papers in. You could serve when you were 19. You could turn them in 90 days before your birthday, and so I was like, I'm done. Like I graduated. I hated high school. My senior year, I did independent studies. So like I'd go to school once a week for an hour and turn in all my work, and then get all my work for the next week. And it was a lot more practical for me. Like I worked and I surfed, and so it worked out better for me. And my football coach was like the independent studies teacher, so that was good. I got I got I got PE credit for surfing, so that was yeah,
Nice.
yeah. Um, but yeah, so I turned my papers in. My birthday is May 1st, and I turned my papers in like 90 days before, on the dot. And everyone's asking, "Oh, well, when are you going?" And what year did you guys serve?
I was '04 to '06, and Zach was '05 to '07.
Okay. So you guys still got the mailed calls, right? Or
Yeah.
they weren't text or email yet.
No.
Oh,
No, not yet.
yeah. Yeah. We definitely live in a fast food world nowadays. But so I turned my papers in, and like there was this older lady in my ward that was like, "Oh, when are you going on your mission?" And I was serving. That was back when we had stake missionaries. So like I was a stake missionary, and I had like a stake mission presidency and everything. And like I'd go on exchanges with the missionaries all the time. We'd go up to UC Santa Cruz. That was always an adventure. T- uh, Two guys walking around up there together. But So I turned my papers in, and she asked me, when are you going? I'm like, I hope I have my birthday in the MTC. Like I'm just waiting any given Thursday, it can show up here. And um, so like 3 months goes by, and I'm like, okay, I'm 19. Like I graduated. I'd gotten a job. I was working as a pipe fitter, and then just saving up my money to go on a mission. And then I had a friend that was the same age but a year younger in school, and her and I and a couple other friends all went to prom together, and we went to this place, and my friend Matt and I were late picking our dates up because we were at the driving range hitting golf balls in our tuxedos. Like it was just, we were having fun. And then anyway, they like went to go to the bathroom while we were eating dinner, and this little Italian restaurant, there's people singing and dancing on stage, and I had just gotten laid off from this job because we were doing some government work, and they had a whole bunch of changes of things. And I was like, oh, so while our dates were in the bathroom, we asked to sing and dance up on stage at this restaurant, and like got hired on the spot. And I was like, all right, cool. You got, can keep saving up money. And we sang Bohemian Rhapsody. But
That's even better.
and so they came out and they were like saw us on stage and they're like, what the heck? And anyway, so my birthday comes and then like 3 days later I get a phone call from the stake president and he's like, hey, just wanted to touch base with you. And I'm like, did I get fired like before I even got hired? Like, what the heck's going on? And he said that the bishop had superimposed two numbers of my membership number, and that they would be getting me a call, that next week. So I'd been waiting 3 months already,
Oh
and then
my.
so this was like the 3rd of May, and then the 13th of May comes around, and I got my call to Scotland Edinburgh Mission,
Yeah.
and then to report to the MTC on September 15th. So
Oh
I
my
had
goodness.
like 5 months. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like,
Wow.
so I kept working and saving up money. And so the day before I left to the MTC, and what I'd found out was this old lady in my ward, she had been asking me because her dad had passed away and she wanted me to do the temple work for him. And she's like, oh, you're going to be leaving. Well, I'll just wait until you get back. And I was like, okay, well, thanks. That was kind of the last thing on my mind. Um, and, and then I get my call and she tells me like at that time, there was a year and her dad had passed on the 14th of September. And I was like, oh, okay, well, somebody's been learning the gospel and is ready to have the physical ordinance done for him. So I went the day before I left to the temple with he's my brother-in-law now. And I was baptized for this lady's dad and did his temple work and for my grandfather.
Wow.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So it's kind of a testimony building experience of like, family history and temple work and everything. And so that was cool to have that experience after waiting for so long.
Yeah.
And so then I got home and we'd put the Prince of Egypt on reserve at the video store. Like the VHS came out that day and I was like, cool, I want to see that right before I get set apart. And it didn't happen. And I got set apart at home. And then I was supposed to be flying out the next day at at 10 o'clock. And so I go to bed and I wake up because the answering machine had clicked on and it was like, Elder Bright, this is President White, the Missionary Training Center president in Preston, England. So I run upstairs and I answer the phone and I'm like, I don't have to be up yet. Like it was 5 a.m. or whatever. And he's like, I was just wondering where you were. And I was like, well, I was in bed. And he's like, well, and so they had changed my itinerary to like fly from Texas to Chicago. And I guess, I wasn't very versed. I wasn't the global traveler before. And so I didn't know like they were so far ahead. So the day I was reporting, like it was actually the day before that I was supposed to fly out. And
Oh
so,
no.
yeah, so he was calling me. So I walk upstairs and like open up my parents' door and I'm like, hey, I'm supposed to be in England right now. And my mom like sits up and is like, what? So
Oh
there was
man.
a lot leading up to actually getting in the mission field. She called church travel and I flew out like 2 hours later than I was expecting. But I got pulled over on the way to the airport. And then I switched planes, and flew from Chicago to Heathrow, I think. And I was asked for an emergency row exit seat because there's a little bit more leg room, and they put me in one, but I think the plane was like 3 chairs and then 4 or 5 in the middle and then 3 more. It was a pretty big jet. And so they sat me like right in front of the wall where the TV was playing. and I couldn't put my feet like under the seat. And so they came around with drinks, and I asked for some orange juice, and she put it on my tray, and it fell over, and it like poured all over my lap on my new suit. and, and then she wouldn't let me change seats. I'm like, there's an empty seat over there. Can I sit over there? And she's like, no, you're assigned to this seat. And I'm like, well, can I at least have a blanket like to sit on? I'm swimming here on my seat. And so then I finally land, and everyone's going through customs, like, oh, how long are you staying? Oh, here for a week on work. I'm leaving next Tuesday. And then it's my turn. I'm like, oh, I'm here for 2 years. And they're like, where's all your paperwork? And I was like I showed him my mission call. I'm like, this is all I got. like and and so then I was like, I don't have any paperwork. Like, can I go and see, like, I'll leave my bags here. Can I go see if somebody's that's picking me up has got it? And I go out and look, and I don't see any elders. And so then I come back and talk to the guy, and then I go back, and then like 2 sister missionaries come up and were like, oh, Elder Bright, and I was like, yeah, that's me. Like the guy, the deer in the headlights, in a country that I apparently don't have paperwork to be in. And anyway, they got it all sorted out. And but I was like, that's weird, like to drive with 2 sisters by myself, like to the MTC. So I got to the MTC, and like the whole first day that I missed was just people kind of sleeping and relaxing, trying to sleep off the jet lag. So I got there and I jumped right into classes. But
what year was that you got there, Ben?
99.
So September of 99.
Yeah, September 99. And then I flew home like right after September 11th. So,
wow. Okay.
Jeez. Yeah. So that was I'm like, wow, man, this is quite the experience already.
My goodness.
So, and then I think it was Elder Snow who told the story about Elder Hamilton, who was an AP rear-ending that car, like in the roundabout. Like I was in the car when that happened. I had just gone on like got into the mission, and then we went like GQing down, in Edinburgh and stuff, and learned what a job he was and how to avoid stepping in him, and, like all kinds of stuff like that. So then I finally made it to the mission field, and hiked up Pratt's Hill, and did what I needed to do to get ready to be gone for 2 years.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, before you dive into the mission part, let's jump over to coming home just after September 11th, which must have been another adventure. And catch us up on life since you've been home from your mission now, 20 some odd years since that happened.
Yeah. So I remember it was like the last P day before I flew home. We're walking down Princess Street in Edinburgh, and my parents had told me that, like, hey, we want you to get a kilt to bring home with you, or get our family tartan and everything. And then they sent me money, and I was like, okay. So I was, getting everything I needed to get a couple more things before I headed home. So I think I went and bought like a sporran and a couple different things on that particular day. But I was walking down to Joffrey Taylor was the name of the place, and this guy like walks out of a pub just pasty white, and he's like, "Did you see that?" And I was like, "No, what happened?" And he had an American accent, and he's like, "My brother works in those buildings. Like, look." And I looked in the window at the pub, like right as the live footage of the second plane hitting, and he like freaks out. He's like, "I'm on my honeymoon. I'm supposed to fly home today. My brother works in that building." Like, so he was just totally freaking out. And
Oh,
and oddly enough, that morning, my companion and I, for companionship study, had studied an article in the Ensign about how of any Christian denomination, like our church would bridge the gap between Christianity and Muslims. So we had like studied that article that morning, and then September 11th happens, and yeah, it
hmm.
was pretty crazy. So getting to the airport, and like all of my flights had changed. I flew into Chicago O'Hare. They asked us if we'd gone in any fields, and we'd hiked Pratt's Hill, the last day. And I was like, yeah. So there was me and two other missionaries. They took our shoes, and like they were gone for like 20 or 30 minutes with our shoes, and they had to disinfect them. And they were like, man, you guys need some new shoes. These things are all worn out. and and I'm like, yeah, so then my flight into San Jose, California, like I was supposed to get there at about 7 p.m., which is a good hour for people to be, awake. And my parents, I was like, I wrote home, I'm like, I want to have like a live band. Like, this is a huge achievement. Like, I want, we're going big when I get home. And so they had just changed it to where, security was heightened. You couldn't go to the gates anymore. So like I had to find my way out the airport and through the security gates, where my family looked more happy to see me, so they could go home and go to bed, and to celebrate, me coming home, because it was like after 1 a.m.
Oh
by
my
the time I
God.
finally got home. So they were pretty burnt out. So then, because I got home so late, like I ended up getting, like, I got released the next morning. The stake president had changed when I was on my mission, so I didn't know uh, President Pope was his name. I didn't know him very well, but I showed up to his house with my surfboard on the car, and like got released and drove straight to the beach and paddled out with my suit and tie on, and like retired my suit. So I had like people paddling over to me and asking me if I'd lost a bet and was wondering what was going on. And
That's
I'm like,
epic.
well, let me tell you, like,
It's pretty
so
awesome.
yeah. So I had done, I did that. I was, just kind of crazy, growing up. Like, kind of comes with the surfing scene. um, like the crazy guy that's even crazier because everything he does is while he's sober and he can remember it. Um, so so then I got home, and then my sister got home 6 days before me, and then my brother-in-law got home like in December, and then him and my sister got married pretty quick, and they moved to San Luis Obispo. And so I hadn't even been home for a year, and we moved from Santa Cruz, like 2.5 hours south, to San Luis Obispo. Um, and so I go to the singles ward, and there was a girl in the ward that was in my ward when I lived in Oregon for 3.5 years.
What?
Yeah, and I was like,
Crazy.
she was down studying at like a theater. She's an actress. She's actually, so her name's Erin Chambers. She is my sister-in-law now. She's married to my wife's husband, but she's like she's in the single second ward. She's the main character in the movie Errand of Angels. Like, I
Hmm.
don't know if you've seen that. She's got red hair.
Wow.
Anyway, so I saw her and I was like, "Hey, how's it going?" And she was dating my brother-in-law, and like the two of us kind of started hanging out because I didn't know anybody. And San Luis Obispo's a college town, so Cal Poly is down here, and so there's a pretty quick turnover. Sometimes people will just be here for a couple of years, or a lot of and some people end up going to school here, and then they like it so much they'll stay here. But so I started surfing with Carson a lot, and then my wife, like the two of us would start, she would come surfing with us. We were hanging out a lot. And then, so Elder Kerr, who was in the MTC with us, Corey Kerr, he's a professor up at BYU Idaho now. He, so he shows up to like the singles ward, and he's like, "Hey, what's up?" He's like, and he tells my wife Alyssa, like, "Yeah, this is Elder Bright. When I was in the MTC, I wrote you a letter and told you that you should write him. There's a surfer from Santa Cruz that I'd met your future husband." And like, she never wrote me. So I'm like, okay, well, I guess I was meant to be,
Hilarious.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, because she never wrote me when I lived in Santa Cruz, and then we moved down here. Anyway, it's a small world.
It is.
So yeah, so we ended up. So I lived in San Luis Obispo for about a year, and then I went to school up in Wyoming, at Wyoming Technical Institute, to kind of get some accreditation for a lot of stuff that I'd been doing as far as like automotive, like classic car restoration goes. So I was up there for every 3 months we'd have a week off. So I was up there, got dropped off after Christmas in like just tons of snow. And you guys live in Colorado?
That's right. Yep.
Whereabouts?
Just along the Front Range. So I live south of Denver. Jack's north of Denver.
Okay. Yeah, so I was at school in Laramie.
Yeah.
So
Yes, indeed.
I'm like, this town sucks. So I would, most of the time I would go to Fort Collins. And it's like you could tell right where the Colorado border was, because somebody must have been like, "Oh, it's beautiful. Oh, what? Yeah, there's no trees anymore. We'll call this Wyoming." Like it was always like a hard line.
Yes, I've driven that highway before. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, yeah. I think it was 287.
Yep.
Or
Yep.
yeah,
That's it.
yeah. So yeah, so my wife and I got. So I was at school for 3 months. I went through business classes, and then I went home for a week, and we got engaged. And then I went back to school, and then I flew home once in over that 3 months so we could take engagement pictures. And then I went home after, and then that next down week we drove to San Diego. We ended up getting married, and then we got married like Friday, had a reception Saturday, flew to Wyoming Sunday, and then I started school again Monday. So,
Oh man.
yeah. So while I was at school, they asked me. I was at school for like 2 years altogether up there. A lot of times it's just like a 9 month kind of. There's a 3 month elective and then 6 months of a core program, and I was there because I was like, if I'm going to own my own business, the least amount of stuff that I have to send out, or the more knowledge I have, it'd be better. So I was there for a student for a year and a half. But then the school asked me and one other student to build a car for them from the ground up for the big SEMA show. It's called the Specialty Equipment Marketing Association. It's like one of the largest automotive trade shows in the world. So me and a girl, so her name's Jessie Combs. She became, after we finished the car, she became the host on a show called Extreme 4x4. And she died a couple of years ago setting like the women's land speed record. So she died, up in Oregon. It's essentially like a decommissioned jet fuselage with no wings, and I think she was going like 240 or no 529 miles an hour or something crazy like that, and had
Oh my
some
gosh.
kind of catastrophe. But so her and I, we built like for 6 months every day after school we worked on this car, and then for 6 months full time. um and on one of the down weeks, instead of coming home, there was a TV show that came up to the school, and they did like video interviews with students, and they picked people to be on the show, and I got picked, and then they asked me to work full time for them after I graduated, and so I did the responsible thing and took like a job with tuition reimbursement and everything. And so I was, but I was still working on the show. Like I lived in LA, and I would work from 11 till 9 at night. And then I would go from and work from like that was in LA, and I'd ride to Huntington Beach, and I would work from like 10 o'clock until about 4 in the morning. Like it was my goal just to get home before I got stuck in traffic of people going to work. So I did that for like 3 months, and I was like, I'm over this. Like the place I went to work for, they hadn't paid any of my student loan, like my payments yet. And they're like, oh, you have to work here for 6 months. And I'm like, no, like this was all negotiated with the manager. And so I was like, I quit. I was trying to do the responsible thing. And you never know with TV shows and things like that, like how consistent it's going to be. So
Yep.
I was like, well, I'm just going to go all in. And so then I ended up working for the TV show. Yeah, like I started work. I did build. So we would steal somebody's car, and we would do like a ground up restoration in 7 days. So I was putting in 7 days. I was averaging like 120 hours at the shop.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
because I'm like,
You work like on overhauling or what?
yeah, I did
That's
over.
awesome.
Was it Pimp My Ride?
Oh, it's
No,
overhauling.
yeah,
I'd never
no,
heard of that show, Jack.
With Chip Foose.
it's overrated. Uh, yeah, so I did a couple episodes on the first and second season, and like all the third, fourth, fifth. Like I did over 60 out of the 100 episodes on the show.
Wow, man.
Yeah, like our son. So the last, like the 10th season, they changed kind of the format somewhere along the way, and they were, they're like, well, we're going to do the builds in 3 weeks, and that's 120 hours if you do 40 hours over 3 weeks. So we're going to pay you the same, and I'm like, it's not the same, because we were doing like 3 builds in a month sometimes, and
Man.
so yeah, it was fun. I mean, I don't really have a lot to show for working on that for so long, besides like friends and contacts in the industry. But some of the other shows, they're like, oh, you be on it, and they give you full tool sets and everything. I'm like, I had to sell one of my cars to buy tool sets, like to open up my own shop.
Oh,
So
man.
so I worked on that show for a long time. We had a stint, over 16 years. We had like a 5-year hiatus, in which I was working, doing like restorations on Mercedes Gull Wings and things like that. But so then like 9 years ago, it overlapped. Like I had opened up my own shop because I just wanted to be home for dinner with my wife and kids. And um, so our oldest, he just turned 17. He was born during the fifth season of overhauling, Maverick. So he was born, and then our daughter will be 14 here coming up this month, and Reese, and then our youngest Zephyr, he's 7. So
Nice. That's awesome.
yeah,
So the three kids total, correct?
yeah. So we got 3 kids.
That's awesome.
And then I opened up my own shop 9 years ago. and still trying to get stuff figured out. It's different when you like it's hard keeping your passion a passion and not a job. Yet, like in order for the job to pay, to make a living at it, you like have to do a whole bunch of stuff that you don't like doing, like bookkeeping and things like that. So
Very true.
yeah. Yeah, so my shop it's called Old Soul Speed and Custom. Like we stay pretty busy. I've got 7 cars in the shop right now. I mean, the hardest thing is to find good help. If anybody listening to this wants a job, let me know. Because it can't be any worse than some of the people I've had work with me before.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. So
I just followed you on Instagram. I'm looking forward to watching your progress. That's awesome.
Oh, well, you'll have to look for a long time because I haven't really posted anything for quite a few years. Like when COVID hit, we got so busy because all of a sudden people were like just staring at their cars and getting money given to them. And so, I didn't ask any questions because I'm like, this is automotive related and automotive is considered essential, right? So like, I'm just not going to ask any questions, but we got really busy and I had a lot of friends that, were more than willing to work and couldn't because they weren't allowed to. And so I just stopped posting everything because it kind of felt like a second full-time job almost.
It can be. It can be for sure.
Yeah. So we just on the 27th last month, so we just had our 21 year anniversary. So
nice. That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, but other than that, yeah. Oh, funny thing. So one of our friends got married in the LA Temple, and the bride, she was like getting ready in the temple apartments and stuff, and I was just sitting outside, like by the mailboxes, like, man, I remember having to sit through this at my wedding. But this guy like walked over to check his mail, and I was like, President White? And he looked at me and he's like, oh, Elder Bright. And he remembered my name. He was the
The
mission.
one who called you?
Yeah, he was the MTC president. So then they were serving like a mission at the visitor center at the LA Temple. And so he ended up like having me come to their little temple apartment and see his wife. She was there, and we sat down and chatted for a while, and then it was time for a friend to get married. So like, okay, well, I got to go.
Small world.
Wow.
Yeah.
How about that?
Although most people he had said, like, he'd always say, we'll call him Elder Brown to be safe. Like that was like the the name, not divulging too much information, but yeah. So small world for sure.
It is. That's really cool. I love it.
Yeah.
Well, I love the backstory and everything you shared, Ben. It sounds like you've had quite an adventure since returning home, and that's awesome. Love to hear it.
Yeah.
Take us back now to the start of the mission, if you want to talk a little bit more about Pratt's Hill and your first assignment, but go through areas, companions, and your memories of your experiences in Scotland.
Yeah. So I got into the mission field, and then met my trainer. It was Elder Kraus was his name. He's from Cody Kraus. I think he's from Rexburg, Idaho. And so that was like when there was 4-week moves. So I was with him for 4 weeks. And he was a good guy. He like played football back when Rick's had a football team, and just good guy. Taught me how to work hard. I didn't even know like that we had a P day until my second companion. Like I thought like, oh, are we cheating and going and shopping, or like, well, how's this work? But we
That's
worked
hardcore.
hard. Yeah. We worked hard. And then he got moved, and my second companion was Casey Anderson. Um, he's from Gunnison, Utah. Um, funny thing, like my wife's cousin, a lot of people, they're like, oh, I'm going home from a mission. I'm going to go sell alarm systems or, pest control. And so he always talked about his buddy that had like an alarm company. And anyway, so my wife's cousin, he does the whole summer sales thing in different states, and he's a team leader. And I was like, oh, one of my companions works for some company, and like I looked him up, and I'm like, have you heard of Vivint before? And he's like, oh yeah. He's like, what's your companion's name? And I'm like, his name's Casey Anderson. And he's like, that's your companion? That was your companion? And I was like, yeah, why? And I guess he's like the vice president of like summer sales for Vivint or something like that. And I was like, oh, cool. To me, it was just like a companion that loves snowmobiling, and we worked hard together. I was companions with him for 3 months, and then he went home. And so interesting thing, like I get called to Paisley. Well, and then I got a letter from my grandparents of a picture of them in front of the Paisley church building in 1965. And I was like,
wow. Holy
I was
cow.
like, who are you guys? Like, who's in the picture? And well, my grandfather and my mom, when I think my mom was in like 8th grade, they got called on a family building mission. So they moved from like the Bay Area of California over to France. And he led the construction of the Versailles Chapel in France. And
Cow.
which I guess it's like people were asking why it was so big, like why are you built, like there's not that many church members now. That building that he built is the stake center now. So from 65 to 67, my mom and her family were serving a mission in France. And from 65 to 67, my great grandfather, who I never met, he was called from San Francisco to be a bishop in Paisley, Scotland. So
Oh my
so
gosh.
yeah. They said that was the picture they sent me was just after the completion of the Paisley building, because when my great grandfather was there, they met at like in Renfrew at like a rec center.
Mhm.
And you said you'd served in Johnson, right?
Yeah, I did. Yep.
So when I was there in Paisley, I met a guy. I want to say his name was Peter Cameron.
Oh, yes, Peter Cameron. He's a legend.
Yeah, so he was actually my great grandfather's counselor in the bishopric.
Oh my gosh. That's amazing.
Yeah, so he picked me up and like took me around and showed me where they lived and where the old building was. At that time, he like lived in Johnson, but he was the bishop in Oban, I think. So he like had to drive all the way up and around to
Oh,
go to
wow.
Oban.
That's
So
amazing. Not
yeah,
surprised at all. He was a legend for sure.
yeah. Yeah, so that was pretty cool. I kind of got to learn about my great grandfather like through the eyes of, one of his counselors in the bishopric.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah. And then when I was in Paisley, I met a guy named Ronnie Mackay. He was a member in the ward there. He was deaf, and we would go once a week, and he would teach us how to do British Sign Language, which is like two-handed.
Okay.
So like your 5 fingers are like your vowels, like A-E-I-O-U. Like it's pretty easy to learn, but we would go there to his house like once a week, and he would teach us how to sign. We would kind of read the scriptures with him and explain it to him, because he said that he was born deaf, and he was working construction, and a bunch of his coworkers had they had like a newspaper in their lunchbox, and and they were looking at it and laughing, and he didn't know how to read, and he brought it home one time after they threw it out and asked his mom, and she like threw him a dictionary and was like, learn how to like figure it out yourself. and
Wow.
and so I was companions with Elder Kraus and Elder Anderson, and then Elder Ballard, Duncan Ballard, came in from Hastings, England, which was, I mean, I don't know if you guys experienced, the love relationship between Scotland and England, but like one time Braveheart was on TV, and where he was from in Hastings, like the Battle of Hastings in 1066, like everyone knew about that. And so like Braveheart was on, and even some of the members were like, Elder Bright, you can come in, but he's got to stay outside. And like they wouldn't let him in, and like like proselyting after Braveheart was, was pretty useless. Like, let's just go steam some wool sweaters at the charity shop instead. um, so
Wow.
Elder Ballard and I were companions for 6 weeks. And I kind of felt like this is my first area. Like I was probably going to be getting moved. And before moves, like Ronnie Mackay had a stroke. Like we went over to his house, and you ring the doorbell and it would like flash his lights, and he didn't answer the door. And I kind of looked in the window, and I could see him standing there just sweating. And and then we made our way into his house, and he had a stroke and he was in the hospital. So I would go like every day, because at this point, I mean, I had been there for 4 or 5 months, and I had to teach him how to sign again, like everything that he had taught me. So it was pretty humbling. There was another member in the ward, Angus was his name, and we'd worked with him, and got him to bear his testimony for the first time in sign language. So I thought that I was going to be getting moved, and then Elder Ballard got moved. So he got moved, and then Whitney Williams came in, and him and I were companions for I think we were companions for 6 weeks, but we had some great times. Had some guys that we were teaching that were kind of homeless. They lived in like a common area, and so one of the guys he was a boxer, and he had like boxing matches and everything, and we would get president's permission, and we'd gone to a couple of the boxing matches. And then he ended up getting he got us tickets to see Mike Tyson and Lennox Lewis fight.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So we had these tickets, and I was like, oh, cool. And then I ended up getting moved.
No.
And then Elder Williams and Elder Castle was the guy that came in and replaced me. The two of them got to go, and I guess there was all kinds of issues, because the guy that we shared the flat with, they were cousins, the Panhausens, from the Netherlands. One of them was the district leader, and called the mission president, and they just had like there was a bunch of issues. So I missed the fight. But we got to go. Andy Bell and Phil Root was their names. Like I got to go see Phil fight at like the Paisley, like the big town center. We got to see that. Like
awesome.
Paisley was an awesome area. Met a lot of great people. Had Gordon Mackey was a guy that we met, had a chance to baptize. and then just a lot of awesome members in that area. I remember the first day, there was this. We were riding the bus at Elder Kraus, and there's this. He's like, "Oh, that's a less active member on the bus over there." Like, so I tried talking to her, and I could not understand anything that she was saying. I was like, okay, and I'd look at him, and then she'd repeat herself, and then I'd look at him again. And she finally, she was like, whatever, and then like right before I moved, I got to go to her house because it was in the area from the other missionaries. But I got to go back to her house and I guess kind of make amends. Like I could understand her. But so I ended up getting moved to be the zone leader companion in Motherwell. So
Nice.
so I went to Motherwell and was companions with Elder Cook, Riley Cook. He lives in Colorado.
Nice.
Yeah. Yeah, his dream when he got home was to be a backup dancer for Britney Spears. Sorry, Cook. The cat's out of the bag.
Riley, come on the podcast and defend yourself.
so Cook and I, like, we had some great work going, and the day that I got to that area, I replaced Elder Udi, who you had on the podcast, and Udi stayed, and he stayed and for a baptism, because the day that the moves was, there's a man named Walter Brady that got baptized, and so I got to meet Udi. That was the only time I'd ever met him. But so Elder Cook and I were teaching a lot. We went up to Lanark for like the Lanimers Day and gala and everything with a bunch of the members, and then we went on this hike, and they were we always had a change of clothes, and so we go on this hike, and nobody tells us like the end of the hike. I don't know how far we hiked. It ended at like a river, and everybody on the banks of the river just started getting mud and throwing it at people. and I was like, okay. So so one of the guys, Chris Jack, was there. He was hiking with us, and he jumped over this little fence, and he rolled his ankle and he broke his ankle. So they took him to the hospital. Well, Cook and I go on this hike, and then we're driving home. Like he was the zone leader, so we had a car, and we're driving home, and I see in the distance, and I remember vividly, for some reason, we both knew the lyrics to Red Hot Chili Peppers' Under the Bridge downtown. So it's like, we weren't listening to it, right? So it was okay. We were singing it. And I was like, hey, that car's turning. And he doesn't do anything. I'm like, put the brakes on. And then like the third time I yelled at him, and he slammed on the brakes, and we slid for about 20 yards. And then he took his foot off of the brake right before we rear-ended this car. And we shot over up this curb and hit the end of a wall. So I'm like, dude, that wall is probably older than America. And we hit it, and it just destroyed the Vauxhall Corsa. And I look, and the wall like kind of teeters and then falls. A big section of it falls over, and there was some off-duty policemen that were driving to work, and so they called the ambulance, and they got us out of the car. Cook, he had 3 weeks left of his mission, and he had hit his knee on the dash like so hard it split his kneecap into 3 pieces, and they had to operate, and he was in a cast like from his ankle to his groin. And
Oh my gosh.
So there was 2 sisters in the wards, older sisters, and their mom was not a member, but she had the Jacks, Ishbel and Mary Jack. So, and Gran, I don't even know what her first name was. We just called her Gran.
Yeah.
So Gran, I can't remember that now, but she had a chairlift like up her stairs. So we got permission to go and live with her for 3 weeks, and that was, gosh, it was probably an hour away from where we were. Our flat was in Wishaw.
Oh my gosh.
So the mission president, at this time it was President Clyde. He said, like, just stay up there, and like there's a bunch of young men that lived up in in that area, and so he's like you need to go on exchanges, go back with Elder Newton and Bunez, and just the three of you guys go out, and then the young men could stay with Elder Cook. And like I always called those guys and they never would return my call or pick up. And so like for 3 weeks I didn't do anything except re-landscape the whole backyard and in Grand's, like at Grand's house, and I was going stir crazy.
Jeez.
So yeah, so then then I found out why they never returned my call. They had like their own stuff going on. With some of the girls in the ward. So yeah, there was another missionary so we had this awesome ward mission leader, Alec McKee, and we'd go play football every Saturday with him, and he had daughters our age, and we had this. So anyway, so Cook got in an accident, and then I got moved to the other area in the same flat. So I wasn't the zone leader companion anymore. They had Elder Leo come in, who had been a zone leader companion in that area. So he was the zone leader. And then Elder Bunez ended up being who was a new missionary that lived in the same flat with me. He ended up being the zone leader companion. And then I ended up being a senior companion that was whitewashing and training in the other area of the flat. and so that was tough because I was like, man, I was, straight out of doing nothing for 3 weeks to like jumping back into the deep end. But so we ended up one night, Elder Leo was on the phone with the guy Elder Patterson, who was in the other area in the zone. I can't remember the name of the area now, but so he was on the phone. Elder Parker was the new missionary I was training, Edwin Parker from Spanish Fark, I think it is.
You said it perfectly.
Yeah. So we had just like finished planning, and the flat in Wishaw was like above the pub at the main crossroads of town, and it had like a big bay window that looked out over the crossroads, and you could see all kinds of stuff going on, and great for people watching. But so we ended up planning, and then I went upstairs and I heard this really loud noise. So I went back downstairs, and two taxis had at the main cross had gotten a head on, and at that point the police were there. Like I think the ambulance came. They were taking somebody out on a stretcher, and Elder Bunez had taken a picture of like the accident, and I was like, oh yeah, I'd take the picture and send it home. And then these two guys down like on the street or on the sidewalk, they started yelling at us and saying a bunch of stuff, and I was like, I'm going to bed, like I'm not going to deal with this. So I walked back upstairs, and I was like, oh man, I don't have a good feeling about this. So I put my shoes on and everything. And then I walked back downstairs, and I was like, where'd those guys go? And they said, oh, they walked down the street to the Chippy. which like there was the pub and then there was an alleyway between the chippy and the pub that you have to walk through to get up to our flat. And we had one neighbor who I'd never met before. He was always traveling. And so I started hearing some noise outside. And so I looked out the window next to our door, and there's these two guys kicking the neighbor's door in. And I was like, I've never met that guy. He's never home. Like, they're not going to get much. And then they came and they knocked on our door, and I was like, let's not even deal with this. Like, hopefully they'll just go away. And Elder Leo was on the phone with Elder Patterson, and he's like, oh, I'll get it. And he answers the door, and he's like, hey, how's it going? And can I help you? And the guy's like, yeah, you can help me, and just punches him right in the nose and breaks his nose.
Oh my gosh.
And then he comes into the flat, and I was there and practiced the laying on of hands, and like threw him out of our place. Elder Bunez is like yelling, like, what's going on? Then I threw this guy out, and then his friend like ran away. And there was, from our flat, there was like a set of stairs and then a landing, and then a set of stairs and a landing, and then another set down to like the alleyway. So this guy takes off running. I ran and like jumped up over like the railing and landed on the on the landing. And I picked him up and threw him against the wall. I'm like, what are you doing? And he's like, I just followed that guy. And meanwhile, this girl, Claire, that worked at the chip shop that we'd been teaching, she came up because she knew those guys. She went to school with those guys, and she was yelling at them, telling them to leave us alone. And Elder Leo's screaming at these guys, holding this bloody rag on his nose, telling, look at what you've done to God's creation, and like all this stuff. It was pretty classic. So the guy's like, let's take this downstairs. And we go downstairs, and he goes out the door first, followed by Leo. And then the guy goes and grabs a bottle out of the dumpster from behind the pub. And Leo takes off and runs out the alleyway. And I was going out, and that girl Claire was behind me. So I like closed the door and was like, hey, let's not deal with this. And meanwhile, Bunez is like, Bright, take this. And he's like trying to throw me a golf club. And I'm like, this is out of control.
Oh gosh.
And
welcome to Motherwell.
Oh yeah. So then the guy starts throwing bottles, and above and I was looking through like the little letterbox in the door trying to see, like, because I was going to take the guy out. And then he started throwing bottles, so I backed up the stairs, and a bottle came through the window and it hit me in the face, and it cut my eye all open, and I'm bleeding everywhere.
Oh my gosh.
And then Elder Leo, he comes back with one of the police officers, and this guy had taken the leg from a bar stool that was broken in the dumpster, and he chases the police out the alleyway with it. And I'm just like, this is out of control. And so we ended up going to the hospital. Leo, like, I don't know if they packed his nose. He broke his nose. They told me, like, if they tried to dig the glass out of my eye, that it would leave a bigger scar. So I just had these like steri strips on my eye for a while. And so we get home, and it's like 1:30 or 2 in the morning. And I remember Elder Daleabout, I think, was the assistant, one of the assistants at the time. And the phone rings, and Elder Bunez answers it, and he's like all hyped up, and he's like, oh, mate, and he's like yelling and swearing and all this stuff. And and then he like just goes quiet, and he's like, President, how are you doing? And he thought it was the AP. And it was actually President Wilkinson. So anyway, fast forward to like one of my last areas. My companion tells me that President Wilkinson's first day of the mission in the area he served in, like he was serving in, there was an investigator that had accused them of raping her, and they had all these police and everything. This was President Wilkinson's like first day in the mission. And then I put two and two together, and his first night in the mission was when we had just gotten this fight. So like,
Oh my gosh.
yeah, yeah. So I was there. I trained Elder Parker. We got in that fight, and then that happened with the president. And then we had been visiting this gentleman named Charlie Parvin, and he was like a friend of the missionary that was like the Scottish national champion boxer back in the day. And he had these like Staffordshire Terriers, and he would take like a dog treat, and he'd put it on a missionary's knee while they were sitting on the couch. And just like, you could see like saliva just dripping out of his dog's mouth. And then he'd be like, all right, get it. And he just like, it was like the initiation. He'd just slobber all over the missionaries. But he would take us on P days, like to like a boxing gym and stuff like that. And he's always like, anybody ever gives you any trouble, just mention my name. And we were walking one time down the street, kind of in the area that he lived, and this guy came out of the close and started yelling at us like, "Oi, mate, it's only Tim's down here. Like, get on your way," and everything. And I was like, "Oh, we're just going to see our pal Charlie Parvin. You know him?" And he like looked at me and turned around and walked away and didn't say anything else. So Charlie like was pretty notorious. So after the mission president calls us that night of the fight, he calls and he's like, "Hey, I heard something happen at your flat." And this is like after 2 a.m. And I explained everything to him, and he's like, "Okay, who was it?" And I was like, "Oh, the guy's name was Chris Duffy." And he's like, "Chris Duffy," like writing. He's like, "Okay, don't tell anybody that I talked to you. I'll take care of it for you."
Oh
And I was like,
gosh.
"Wow." And then meanwhile, like this new member, Walter Brady, he ends up telling me like that, you know, he didn't partake of any of the beating, so he just drove the van that all the guys got out of. But he's like, "Yeah, I drove a van full of boys over to his house, and the last time I saw that guy, he was running out of the close like with a hatchet in his hand, chasing a bunch of my pals, and he was just bloody from head to toe." And I was like, "Wow, this is pretty crazy." So yeah, it was Motherwell was a crazy area. I will have to say, just disclaimer, like, I have to apologize to any members in the Motherwell area. Being like a crazy surfer, I got bet some money, which usually came really slim to missionaries. Like, "Hey, if you walk down the town center in a Speedo, I'll pay you 200 pounds. So I did that, and like I was like, "Oh, there's what I." So I had to go into the work of one of the members to prove it, and then they gave me like 20 quid, and I was like, "Are you kidding me? Like, I almost sold my eternal salvation for that." Like but
Oh my gosh.
so anybody in Motherwell, I apologize if the missionary work had gone stale after I was there for any of my actions.
And
But
they shorted you 90% of what they said. That's terrible.
yeah,
Oh
yeah.
gosh.
So we in that area, we were at this lady's house. She had a less active son who was a chef, and he would invite us over and make dinner for us. And you know, like the whole building relationships of trust and all of that. So he was big into karate, and like we would cook together, and he's like, "Oh, let me show you some stuff." And so one time we were there, and he's like, "You're pretty tall. Like, see if you can kick my hand." And he like raises his hand up, and I kick it, but in the process, about like 18 inches of the back of my trousers, like from my belt all the way up, had like this whole seam had ripped out. And so his mom was like, "Oh, let me sew those up." So like we eat. This was so I ate dinner wearing a robe, um, and she sewed that up for me, and then the bus didn't come when it was supposed to, and it's like something's not right, and we're walking, and with sewing my trousers and everything, we were a little bit later than we were hoping, and this guy, like shaved head, this big guy, he like pulls up in a car and he's like, "Are you the Mormons?" And we are like, "Yeah," and he gets out of his car and he like comes storming over to us and he's like, "I've been looking for you all night." And I was like, "Oh, here we go," um, and then he comes over and he like sticks his hand out and he shakes our hand and he's like, "My name's Scott. Like my girlfriend is a member and we just had a baby, and like I'm ready to be a good dad and I'm ready to learn about the gospel." And so I was like, what a turn of events, Like, I'll rip my pants out any day for that.
Yeah, no kidding.
So I ended up at this time I was companions with Robbie Harrison from Mesa, Arizona, and I'd heard, I don't know how many years ago, but he passed away.
Oh wow!
And so the two of us we would go over and we'd teach Scott and his girlfriend, encourage them. They ended up getting married, and then I was like, I'm not going to teach the rest of the discussions, like, because I know I'm probably going to be getting moved. So I left the sixth discussion for Elder Harrison and his new companion to teach, and then they baptized him. And gosh, when I was at school like 20 years ago, I got an email from him randomly that was like, "Hey, I just wanted to thank you. Like, I still read the Book of Mormon every day. Like, my church membership is, one of the most important things to me." And I was like, "Wow, that's pretty cool." Like, I didn't know how that all played out, after I moved. Um, so, so that was, that was Motherwell. Um, I did have an experience. So when I was, uh, in that when I was with Elder Parker, Hamilton was in our district, and so I was a district leader too. So I was like whitewashing training, district leader, and senior companion, and so there's a guy, Elder Stevens, that was there, and his companion was Elder Christiansen, and Elder Wade Christiansen was there. There was so he was one of the ones. Remember the story that Elder Snow told about the guy that was supposed to go to Shetland and he was spending the night in Thurso, and the next morning they woke up and he was gone and he was at the mission home. He'd like hitchhiked all the way from
Yeah.
Thurso. So that was, I won't say his, so he was one of the missionaries that was supposed to go to the Czech Republic. So we had this influx of missionaries from the Czech Republic, or they were waiting on visas, and they had spent 3 months in the MTC. And Elder Christiansen had gone to Boston for 3 months, and then he was given a new call to come to Scotland. But most of those missionaries, they still wore their badge written in Czech, and a lot of them kind of had a hard time transitioning and accepting the fact that they didn't go to the Czech Republic. So I get home one night, back to the flat, and the mission president's on the phone. This is in Motherwell still, party time, and he's like, "Hey, do you know where Elder Christiansen is?" And I was like, "Well, it's like after 9. Like, I'm hoping he's planning with his companion. I haven't made my call yet." And he's like, no, he ran away from his companion this morning at like 7, and they haven't been able to locate him. I was like, oh, crappy.
Man.
So,
Oh my gosh.
yeah. So that all kind of got sorted out. Sometimes missionaries just need some time to themselves after being with a companion for so long.
Jeez.
And Elder Christiansen got moved to Aberdeen. Well, I was like, okay, hopefully I won't have to deal with anything like that again. So then Elder Harrison and I companions for 6 weeks, and then I get moved to Aberdeen to be Elder Christiansen's companion. And and this is like during Christmas, so it's freezing up there. When you served in Aberdeen, did you live in the Errol Street flat, or did you guys?
No, they must have bagged that one because we lived in Charlotte Street. It was like a cobblestone road, pretty close to like the main shopping center. So
Okay.
I don't know if that was in the mission at that point or not.
Yeah. Well, you know where like Pittodrie Stadium is, like where Aberdeen's football team played, or like
Yes, I do. Yeah.
so there's like Pittodrie, and then there was a big like cemetery right next to it. So our
Okay.
flat was like across the street from the cemetery at the top. So so
Like,
so we could like see into Pittodrie Stadium from like if we looked across the cemetery. It was pretty crazy. So we would
crazy.
we would go running in the mornings. That's when Elder Williams and I think Elder Stroh were companions up there in
Okay.
Aberdeen. There was the 4 of us in that flat during Christmas, and yeah, we ended up running in the mornings, and I was like, I'm going to lengthen my stride, and I'm going to keep up with Elder Christiansen, because he had gone before his mission to, I don't know if he was on scholarship, I think, running cross country. So it was tough to do, but I tried to hang with him to let him know I wasn't going to give up. And I told President Wilkinson, like, hey, it's kind of nerve wracking sometimes, like, and you hear the door close in the morning and you think you're going to get out, of the shower to see your companion running down the street. And he had just told me, like, Elder Bright, I'm sure if that happened, he would regret it. Like, and so we were there during Christmas, and it was the first time I'd ever served around sisters. There was 6 of them up there, and that was a different experience. Like most of the time, it like around Glasgow, they was too rough, so they didn't serve there. So up in Aberdeen, it was right into serving around 6 of them, and we had a great time. There was one sister. There's a senior sister. There was Sister Whitaker. She's from Wales. Sister Megan Edmonds. And then there was Sister Jensen from, I think, Syracuse, Utah. And then there was Sister Webster. She was a senior sister from Morgan, Utah. And then there was also like a mini missionary, one of the local members that was serving with them. And so I was the district leader. We like had fun. Like we'd do service at the charity shops, and like have hey, get the ugliest dress you can find, or find like the ugliest suit at the charity shop and wear it to district meeting. And we did a lot of fun stuff. We would go down to Dunnottar Castle on P days and like play capture the flag, like for zone activity.
Man.
Did you go down there when you were in Aberdeen?
No, we discovered Slane's Castle up in Peterhead, so we went up north instead.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah. And then who was it? Elder Williams was he was talking about the sister that lived in Stonehaven that would make you weigh yourself before and after.
Yeah.
Do you remember what her name was? I
I
wanted to
can't
say
remember.
sister, but I remember she made like chocolate trifle. Like she was a really good cook, and she would make you like weigh yourself before and after, and write like a spiritual thought in her book, and write your weight gain. And I remember, I think when I left the mission, I held the record for the most weight gained in one sitting at 9 pounds. Um,
Oh my gosh.
but that was, yeah, that was, and it was good food. Um, and so we were there during Christmas, and I'm trying to remember. We had the missionaries one time, since it was a port city, they were coming down off the islands, and like they were almost halfway, and there was somebody on the ferry that had a heart attack, and they had to turn back around, and then they ended up, it was like the longest ferry ride of their life, because they went and dropped the person off to go to the hospital, and then they set off again. And that was for a half mission conference during Christmas. They were coming in, and President Wilkinson, um, his son Tyler Wilkinson, came to speak, and yeah, so I was companions with Wade Christiansen, and that was during Christmas. He had a hard time. He got Dear John, and he didn't want to get out of bed. Like, yeah, it was hard. Like if you're gonna be homesick, like it's gonna hit the hardest during Christmas probably, and if your girlfriend breaks up with you. But we. So did you know the Zemp family? I don't know if they still live there.
Name doesn't ring a bell.
He was the bishop at the time, and we went to their house for Christmas dinner, and we were sitting there, and it was like, oh yeah, he said, I told him my sister's serving a mission in Canada. Here's a picture. Like this is her and her companion on P Day, like a member. Let's missionaries golf for free, and he's like, oh yeah, that's my brother's golf course. I guess he was from Canada, and he was living in Scotland. Um,
Wow.
but and then there was a lady. I'm trying so hard to remember her last name. Her name was Alex. Um, she had gotten baptized like right before I got there, and she was a great lady. And then her daughter had started taking the discussions, and man, I remember her trying to quit drinking coffee, and she said usually by 8 o'clock in the morning, she'd already had 80 cups of coffee.
Oh
And
my gosh.
so we were like trying to teach her like to stop, like we had a non-smoking program we would teach people. And by the time I left, like she had tried to stop, and she had to get put on medication because she was having such bad withdrawals. And so she gained a.
How big were her cups? Were they like legit?
They were like the teacups, I think. Like,
Oh my gosh.
but
That's
yeah,
crazy.
it was crazy. I'm like, oh, there's testimony building experience of the word of wisdom, like, um, yeah. And I remember Alex. She said that she's like, I can always tell the missionaries that are thorough because they polish the backs of their shoes, not just the toes where everyone sees. Like that always like stuck with me. I always think about that when I'm building cars and like fabricating stuff, like doing custom work on some of these classic cars. Like everyone always says the devil's in the details, and I'm like, I believe God's in the details, because the to be able to do something that's not seen, like it makes me feel even worse knowing that I didn't do a good job, even if it's not seen, you know?
Yeah.
So that's like polishing the backs of your shoes. But
Nice.
so I was companions with Elder Whistlecraft. He's another English Gary Whistlecraft. He's from Bexleyheath, um, England, and we were companions for a little while. I called him the missing link because he was like the hairiest guy I'd ever met. Um, so he's like the missing link, and uh, so we would get up a lot in the mornings early and go skateboard and things like that. Um, and then I got moved from Aberdeen to be a zone leader companion in Livingston, and so I spent like the last, gosh, it was like 8 months of my mission in Livingston. Um, my first companion was Chad Staley. Um, we were companions for a while. Um, yeah, like the the biggest skate park in all of Scotland is in Livingston, and like we would get up really early and we'd skate down there and we'd go skateboard for like morning exercise, which which like I have no sympathy for the missionaries nowadays. Maybe once my son goes on a mission it'll change, but I'm like, oh, poor you guys. You don't have a lunch appointment today? Like, I had one dinner appointment a month in some of the areas I was in because, like, the bishop's wife hated the missionaries, like, and nobody would feed us. like, um, and then they have, like, time in the morning set aside to exercise. And, like, I remember we had to be out by 8:30 every morning and in by 9:30. And, um, yeah, but Staley and I had a great time. We met a family named the Simpsons, Sandra Simpson and her husband Rob and Callum. Uh, so we had a chance to baptize them. Rob didn't decide to be baptized, but Sandra and Callum did, and they were awesome. Like they would take us on P days. They would get permission. They took us like to St. Andrews, and we went up there. There's an aquarium up there, and we went to the golf course, and we went to Edinburgh one time and did like the underground tour. And um,
Nice.
yeah, I kind of lost touch with Sandra and Callum. Like I've got a Facebook account. My brother-in-law actually started it for me. He handed me his laptop and was like, "Hey, type in a password." And then it was like, "Okay," and then he's like, "Here you go." And the only picture he had of me was at like a family reunion at the beach where I had just gotten out of the water and I had a towel on and no shirt and I was grating cheese for dinner. And I like made that my profile picture. I was like, okay, well, and I've been able to get in touch with a lot of people from Scotland, like through Facebook, and so that's kind of what I'll generally, keep in touch with people that way. But
Yeah.
and then Elder Staley got promoted to be an assistant, and my last companion was Elder Barta, Pavel Barta from the Czech Republic. Probably the worst driver I've ever been around. I was like, dude, I want to make it home. Like I had 6 weeks left. He he had 3 months left. Like we were working in this area called Bathgate, and like the streets were pretty narrow and there'd be cars on both sides, but they were short enough to where you could see like the other end of the road. So like you would take turns, like one car would go at a time. And I remember him just like flying down the road and making a hard turn and driving straight at another car who was already like halfway through. And and so there's cars parked on both sides, and then we've got two more cars passing each other, like we knocked both of our mirrors off, both of the other cars' mirrors off, and the two inside mirrors of the cars that were parked
Oh
because it was
my
so
God.
tight. And,
Jeez.
so yeah, it kind of, had an experience in Livingston where um we had gone to a half mission conference, and Elder Harold Hillam, who was the area authority, came out to visit. I didn't realize it until just recently, but like Bonnie H. Corden, who was she the General Primary or Relief Society president? I can't remember which one she was, but the H is Hillam. So she was talking in one of her general conference talks about her dad and a story that her dad would always tell. And I remember him at this mission conference telling one of those stories, and then I realized, oh, her middle name is Hillam. Like that was her dad.
Oh
Like
wow.
that was pretty cool.
This is neat.
Yeah. So yeah, we had a chance to the last area I served in. One of the members, Ann Logan, her mom would always be at the dinner appointments, and she was a non-member, and I was joking with her one day, like, "Hey, like I'd be happy to paint your ceiling, like if you let us teach you a discussion." And she's like, "Okay." I guess people had never asked to teach her or something like that, and so she was 73, and the hardest thing for her was stopping smoking, which she had done since she was like 13 consistently, and then also going in the water. I'm like, you live on an island, like, you're worried about going into a baptismal font. But she was 73. Like she was able to quit smoking, and we got to the opportunity to baptize her before we came home. Elder Staley and I vividly remember one of my friends back home was kind of a pretty well-known big wave surfer, and we were getting gas at the gas station, and I went in to pay or filling up our petrol, and I saw the Scotsman newspaper, and I was like, this looks familiar. And it was like an aerial view, and it said surfers gather to mourn the loss of a friend. And I'd found out that my friend had passed away from the front page of the Scotsman newspaper.
Wow.
And so I remember making like zone calendars and everything. And he's actually if you haven't seen it, they made a movie about him. It's called Chasing Mavericks. It's
Yeah.
about Jay Moriarty is his name, and the guy Frosty is his mentor. So it was Jay that passed away when I was there on my mission. But
Hmm.
when we lived in Livingston, one of the only day that I ever rode a bike on my mission was a P day, and we'd borrowed like 4 bicycles, and we ate a big breakfast. And it was Elder Staley, Elder Lindley, and he was companions with the guy Elder Moore, and so we borrowed these rickety old bikes, and the mission president's like, yeah, just stay off the main roads. So we got like a map of all the back roads, and we rode to the mission home and on the way there, like Elder Lindley pulled over and puked everywhere because we ate a big breakfast, and then we ended up going to the mission home, and Sister Wilkinson and the lady that worked there with her sister. Oh, I can't remember her name now, but
Sister Black.
Black. I think that was it. Yeah. So they made us lunch, and then we headed back, and Lindley was like, I'm done. Like, you're going to have to go home and get your car and come back and pick me up. So I think we had ridiculed him enough into peer pressure where he like got back on the bike, and we ended up riding. But then we talked to some members, and they were like, that was like That's like 30 miles.
Oh my gosh.
We had like ridden bikes. It was like 15 miles each way, I guess. And it was much more of an adventure on the way there because you're all excited. And then on the way back, you're like, how much farther? um, but I was, we were visiting this lady who was a Jehovah's Witness, who was like an eternal investigator. Every time we'd go visit her, she'd ask us to sing the Spirit of God, and we would tell her like, "We'll sing that at your baptism," because I guess a lot of the previous missionaries would sing for her. So we were visiting her, and I was like, "Oh man, I don't feel good," and I was like, "Let's go." And so we ended up leaving, and I kind of bent over because I was lightheaded and I passed out and like rough like I cheese grated my hand on like the rough casting on this house, and
Oh
then
man.
we went to the hospital. Elder Barto was like, I didn't know what to do, like you passed out and your eyes were open and you started puking. And I was like, I went to the hospital, and they gave me paracetamol, which is like the cure all for them. and
Uh,
I went back to the flat and I slept for like 2 days. And
oh
I
my
don't know
gosh.
what, I just got sick, and I'm like, I've got 6 weeks left. Like I'm trying to, make up for a multitude of sins here and go home. Like, and but so then I got frustrated because Elder Barta had sat at home for the 2 days, like eating Doritos and guacamole, and he made himself sick. So he was there for 2 days. So I was ready to go back out, and he was sick. I'm like, oh man, but that's just how it goes. So we ended up, yeah, I ended up finishing my mission. Elder Barto was my last companion. He actually married. I think he got home, and then he got married to his girlfriend that would call all the time, and then he was a non-member. Like I think he'd only been a member for about a year or so before he came out. And I'll never forget it. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Tyler, a Real Hero,
Yep.
where like President Wilkinson's son gets in a car accident and is paralyzed. Well, we're in like president's interviews, and Elder Barta is like telling him like, "Oh yeah, I played hockey. Like I broke my neck, and they told me I'd never walk again, and like now I'm fine." And I remember Elder or President Wilkinson just saying like, "Elder Barta, consider yourself lucky," like, and I was like, dude, have you ever seen the movie? Like, what the heck? And he hadn't seen it. And so I showed it to him, and he's like, I think it dawned on him, like, oh, okay. Maybe that's why Elder Bright was calling me an idiot. But um, so Elder Barta ended up, he must have gotten divorced, and then he married one of the sisters from France when I moved to Aberdeen, Sister Pratique. He ended up marrying her, and so they're still married. I think they have like 5 sons. Um,
Nice.
but and then my other one of my other companions, Elder Cook um, in Colorado, he married Sister Smith, who he was the district leader of in Sterling. Um, so um, small world, but that's I mean that's pretty much it. Like now, you hear the cliche like, best 2 years of my life, or like not a day goes by where I don't think about my mission. Like um I would debate the best 2 years thing, but like I definitely like think about my mission all the time. It was one of the like two of the big takeaways for me from Scotland was like, one, what type of member do I want to be like when I get home, and two, what type of member don't I want to be when I get home. I think that we learn from everybody, whether it's what we should do or what we shouldn't do. Like there's
Yep.
examples all around us, and um, so I'm grateful for the opportunity that I had to serve in Scotland. Um, there was, I'd love to go back someday. I haven't made it yet. But like the experience, like to draw on that 2 years of experience, with my own children. Like I just finished I just finished planning young men's camp for our stake. Like I serve as the stake young men's president right now. I got called like during COVID. it's been it's been a wild ride, kind of like everything else based on the stories I've told. um,
Yeah.
but I am grateful that, in a world where everything is so it constantly changes, that we've got the gospel as the constant. um I was I was just, kind of pondering about that fast and testimony meeting. Like things change so quickly, and 10 years ago what was totally taboo is now the norm. And the constant grounding and anchor of the gospel has been like a huge blessing in my life. um I mean, I had an experience while I worked on overhauling. They would cater meals, and one time they had Chick-fil-A, and there was some guy filled up his plate, and they had like all these sandwiches with the crust cut off of them. And they're like, they got the crust cut off of those things, and they're like, yeah, it's a Mormon thing, like, yeah, they're closed like every Sunday, they're probably losing out on millions in revenue. And I was like, they cut the crust off of those things. And he's like, yeah. And I was like, because that's really weird, because I don't do that. And he's like, you're a Mormon? I'm like, yeah, have I not told you that like for the last 10 years? like um so it's been an opportunity to, be an example, and um talk about things. The executive producer of the show came up to me one time and was like, I can't believe that believe that in a church that was started by two guys in some apartment. And I'm like, well, not sure if they had apartments back in 1830, but if you want to know anything about it, just let me know. Like, oh, I've already read. I'm like, well, like if I wanted to learn about a Jewish person, I wouldn't ask a Nazi. So if you want to learn about my religion, just ask away. like, um, but
Very well said.
yeah.
One
So
question we like to ask is, you mentioned a couple of your interactions with President Clyde,
yeah.
and also President Wilkinson. Do you have any other good memories of them or their wives that you remember fondly from your mission?
Um, yeah, President Clyde, like I'd always heard that, there was they would rotate. Like when mission presidents get called, there's like one really strict one, like letter of the law, and then one spirit of the law. And I definitely saw that with President Clyde and then President Wilkinson. Like President Clyde was he was, much older than President Wilkinson was, and it was more, you know, if you are obedient, you'll be blessed, and which was true. I think that the saying rings true, that if the church wasn't true, the missionaries would have ruined it a long time ago. Um,
Yep.
and so like my son and daughter are at FSY right now, and they're like, it's so strict, and I'm like, well, if you don't have like those ground rules, and you've got all of these people you're trying to keep tabs on, like it's not going to work. And President Clyde, I just remember when I got to the mission, people were like, you just missed out on zone conference. And he like just discoursed about Kolob for like an hour. And I was like, okay, like, but he was very knowledgeable, in the scriptures. And I always really enjoyed my interviews with him and his wife. She just passed away recently, Sister Clyde. Um, and then when President Wilkinson came in, like he had served the people of Scotland when he was, a missionary. That's where he got called. So I think he knew a little bit more that like the Scottish people, they reacted to love a lot more than rules. Like you have a first discussion that you're teaching, and you're like, "Oh, sorry, it's like 9:15. I gotta go because we got 15-minute walk back to the flat." Like so he was way more understanding about the letter of the law and loving the people. And I remember I remember, and the assistants kind of followed suit too. When I was in Paisley, we had this one missionary, Elder Keir, who was he was like an English rugby player, and he was the assistant. And we had met this guy Paul Evans in Paisley, and he was like punk rocker. He'd come play football with us, and like I grew up, like listening to punk music and surfing and skateboarding and all that type of stuff. And he's like, "Oh, you got to borrow this CD," and I'm like, "Okay, I'll borrow it." So I was just sitting there. I think it was like the Beastie Boys' first album, and I'm like, "That's not really punk music, but whatever." Um, so I didn't listen to it. And Elder Keir's like, get like a surprise flat inspection. Elder Bright, I see some apostate music here in your closet. And he's like, "I'm gonna have to confiscate this." And I'm like that's not mine. An investigator let me borrow it. Like I'm not listening to it. I just borrowed it to make him happy, and well, I'm gonna have to take it. And I'm like, "Well, you're gonna have to get out the door with that, or try to get out the door if you take it." Like you're not taking it. I have a responsibility to give this back to him. So that was like very letter of the law. And then like some of the assistants, I remember the whole Y2K scare. We like were in our flat from Christmas to Boxing Day, like Hogmanay. Like we couldn't go out of our flat. We had to sit in there and memorize stuff for like over a week. I was just going absolutely crazy. And then I found out like the APs were, putting their kilts on and going and walking down on Princess Street and Edinburgh and the Royal Mile and all this. And I was like, "What the heck?" Like, but yeah, President Wilkinson, him and I have the same birthday, actually, I found out. And I've seen him a couple times right before our son Maverick was born, like 17 years ago. I rode my motorcycle up to Salt Lake to a mission reunion with Elder Kerr. And then we ended up staying the night in Vegas at Elder Josh Melvin's house. And then Josh rode his motorcycle up there with us. So we went to a mission reunion up there once, and I saw President Clyde and Sister Clyde, and I've stopped when I was at school in Wyoming. I talked to President Wilkinson and my roommate, who's a non-member. Like the two of us stopped by their house for breakfast one time, and so that was fun to see him. I haven't seen him much since then. Um, I don't know, owning your own business and not having a lot of employees, like time off is pretty few and far between. So
Yeah, makes sense.
yeah, but yeah, I love both of those, mission presidents. I mean, they taught me things that, I'll never forget. Elder Rolf Kerr was the area authority, and he was coming to the mission to visit. Um, and there was like a zone leader seminar, and he was there at the seminar, and President Wilkinson opened it up for questions to ask. And one missionary was like, "Oh, in the Doctrine and Covenants, it talks about this, and like polygamy in the afterlife and this and that." And I just remember President Wilkinson like jumping up. He's like, "I'll answer this." Almost embarrassed that somebody would ask the area authority this question. And he said, "Elders, like I can spend my whole life studying the 4 basic principles of the gospel, like faith, repentance, baptism, and the gift of the Holy Ghost, and not have a complete understanding of those 4 principles by the time I die. Like, I would strongly urge that you guys, study the basic principles of the gospels, and let these mysteries of the kingdom be unfolded when your time comes, and and that stuck out to me because a lot of my friends that have left the church, in the last 10 years, it's those little things that they'll look into too far, and then it'll kind of shake their testimonies, and so I just try to live my life simple.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Well, Ben, it's been a true pleasure to have you come on tonight. Honestly, your stories you've shared, the memories that you've shared, the
Yeah.
connections that you had to Scotland that you didn't know before you got there, pretty amazing. So thank you
Yeah.
for coming and being prepared to share those things. It's been a lot of fun tonight. So thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
It's been fun.
Now I just one caveat is I wrote down all your companions.
Yeah.
We have talked to none of them.
Yeah, you haven't had any of them on there.
No.
Maybe I'll pave the way.
That would be helpful. If you still have your list of all your missionaries from your mission, but in like your mission stuff handy, or if you track it down somewhere, send it to us, because that'll help me put another, who knows how many, couple hundred additional missionaries on our list of hunting.
Like on the like the monthly newsletter, like on the back that had all the companionships.
Well,
yeah, I've got those.
You have that, and I think there was a document you went home that like documented all the missionaries you served with in your time period in the mission. So if you track it down, send it to us. I'd love to have it.
I will, for sure.
But the other thing that we love is, share this as it is published. We'll get it out here as we're speaking early next week, and tag them in the conversation on a post on social media, and tell them to check it out. And as they listen to it, we'll let them know that they can contact us directly. They can email us at SEMpodcast@51spylaw.com, or they can visit that website, 51spylaw.com, and fill out a contact form that's on the top, and we'll get them on the future podcast schedule for sure. That'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah. One other thing, 51 Spylaw Road is also 32 Collington Road.
It is, and
there was some missionaries that would write president's letters addressed to 51 Spylaw Road with the return address of 32 Collington to try to save the money for a stamp.
I did not.
Oh my
gosh!
Yeah,
that's hilarious.
And speaking of like the constants of the gospel, I had a family. One of the their daughter was a thespian, and they like did a fundraiser, and they went to the Fringe Festival. And he was like, "I went to church in Scotland, like next to the mission home, and like I walked in the building, and my phone hooked up to the Wi-Fi." And I was like, "Oh yeah, like." They were probably teaching the same lesson that you would be learning at home, just in a different language that they call English. And yeah, but
that's fantastic.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys. Hopefully I haven't talked too much. I don't even know what time it is.
No, this is
awesome.
This has been so good. And again, like we said, you've connected us to another extension of the mission and the missionaries that served in that amazing land. So share this with them. We love referrals. Put us in contact with those that you're still close with, and we would love to talk with them and hear their experience of what the S.E.M was to them many moons ago as we sit here today.
Right. It goes by quick.
It definitely does. Well, last of all, we would just want to express to you our love for you, Ben. Thank you for being our brother in Scotland. Thank you for setting a great foundation for those of us that followed you into the mission. And it's amazing that there are still some of those people that we corresponded with, even years after the fact that you were there. It's always
Yeah.
fun to communicate with people like you that had those experiences with similar people. And no matter what, I mean, we're all connected through that land, through the gospel and through missions. And it's just amazing to hear those stories, even now. I mean,
Yeah.
we're 23 years since your time in the mission and beyond that. I mean, when you started. So
Yeah.
it's amazing to hear all of your journeys, and we invite anyone who's listening to come and share. We would love to have you on there.
Yeah. Sounds good. I'll try to spread the word.
Cool. That sounds good. Well, we'll be in touch more soon, Ben, but in the meantime, we'll give you a cheerio and we'll talk more soon. All right.
All right. We'll see you later.
All right. See you later. Bye.